Tonight we will travel together through some of the oldest and most luminous rivers of human wisdom. We will walk through the teachings of Zen Buddhism, which asks us simply to see what is already here. We will sit with the Stoics, those ancient philosophers who discovered that peace is not found by changing the world, but by changing the way we meet it. We will rest in the great flowing current of Taoism, the way that moves through all things like water through stone. And we will listen to the Sufi mystics, those lovers of the divine who found that the heart, when it finally opens, is as vast as the night sky above a desert. These are not ideas to be memorized. They are not doctrines to be believed. They are simply reminders, gentle, ancient, patient reminders of something your deepest self already knows. So take one slow breath. Feel the surface beneath you holding your weight without being asked. And let us begin. Section 1. Impermanence. Everything is flowing. There is a moment, if you have ever sat beside a river in the early morning, when the water catches the light in a way that makes it look almost solid, almost still. The surface seems to hold the reflection of the trees and the pale sky above, perfect and unmoving, like a painting left to dry. And for a heartbeat, you might almost forget that the water is moving, that every single drop has already left the place where it just was. That the river you are looking at this moment is not the same river you looked at one breath ago. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, with a simplicity that has echoed down 25 centuries, you cannot step into the same river twice. Not because the river is unreliable, but because the river is honest. It does not pretend to be something it is not. It does not claim to be solid when it is flowing. It simply moves, continuously, faithfully, without apology. The Buddhist teachers called this truth anicca, impermanence. They placed it at the very heart of their teaching not to make people sad, but for the opposite reason entirely. Because they noticed that our suffering, the deep, persistent ache that runs beneath so many of our days, does not usually come from the fact that things change. It comes from our resistance to change, from the tremendous invisible effort we spend trying to hold the river still. Tonight, let us simply notice. Let us simply look at the river. The Quran offers a reminder that carries this same river breath within it. In Surah Al-Anbiya, there is a verse that says, "Every soul shall taste death." And while this might sound heavy at first, the mystics of the Islamic tradition read it differently. They heard it as a love letter, a reminder that everything that arises is precious precisely because it does not last forever, that the flower is beautiful because it will fall, that the evening is golden because the night will come, that this moment, this very breath, is irreplaceable. The Sufi poet Rumi understood this with his whole body. He began his greatest work, the Masnavi, with the image of a reed flute, a piece of hollow reed cut from its reed bed, crying for what it has left behind. Listen to this reed, how it tells a tale, he wrote in his own way, how it sings of separations. The reed makes music from its own wound. It does not plug the hole. It breathes through it, and from that breathing, something unbearably beautiful is made. This is the first teaching of impermanence that the ancient wisdom traditions agree on, from east to west, from desert to mountain. The things we lose are not failures. They are the holes through which music enters. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who spent his evenings not counting gold but writing philosophy by candlelight, returned again and again in his private journals to this same current of thought. He wrote, for himself, not for publication, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." He was not performing wisdom. He was reminding himself, as he needed to be reminded, that the empire he ruled would one day be gone, that his own body was already moving through its changes, that his children, his advisors, his cities, all of it was in the river. All of it was already flowing, and he found not despair in this, but something closer to relief. Let us pause here and try a small experiment together, right where you are lying down. Notice your breath, not controlling it, just noticing. Feel the way the inhale arrives. It is never quite the same shape twice. Sometimes it fills the chest. Sometimes it settles in the belly. Sometimes it catches slightly at the top, like a wave reaching its highest point before it turns. And then the exhale, always different too. Sometimes long and slow like a tide going out. sometimes shorter, more like a quiet sigh, a small release. No two breaths in your entire life have ever been the same. Not one. You have been breathing since the moment you arrived in this world, and every single breath has been its own unique, unrepeatable event. A billion tiny impermanences, strung together like beads on a thread, and that thread is your life. The Zen tradition speaks of something called mujo, the Japanese word for impermanence, which carries within it not tragedy but a kind of exquisite tenderness. There is a word in Japanese, mono no aware, which has no direct translation but means something like the bittersweet beauty of things passing. The Japanese have long regarded the falling of cherry blossoms not as a tragedy but as the very source of their beauty. A blossom that stayed on the branch forever would not move the heart the way a falling blossom does. It is the falling that makes it matter. The Stoics, too, had a practice for this. They called it memento mori, remember that you will die. Not as a morbid meditation, but as a clarifying one. Marcus Aurelius would look at an object he loved, or a person he loved, and say quietly to himself, "This too is something I could lose today." And what happened, what he reported happening in those private pages was not grief. It was presence. The wine tasted more fully of wine. The conversation carried more weight. The face of his child became suddenly, arrestingly, completely real. When we stop insisting that the river holds still, we discover something unexpected. The river is beautiful. Not in spite of its movement, but because of it. The light on the water changes every second, and every second it is magnificent. There is a story that has been told in various forms across many traditions. Imagine a traveler who comes to a great city and spends his entire visit inside a single room, studying a map of the city. He learns every street name, every district, every landmark. He can describe the city in perfect detail. But he has never opened the window. He has never felt the particular way the wind moves through those streets, never smelled the bread from the bakeries, never heard the sound that a specific fountain makes in the evening. He knows the map. He has never visited the territory. We do this with our own lives. We carry a map of how things should be, and we spend our energy checking the territory against the map rather than experiencing the territory directly. We know what our relationship should feel like, what our body should look like, what our life at this age should contain. And when the territory diverges from the map, as it always does, as it always will, we feel that something has gone wrong. The world has failed us. But the world has not failed us. The world is simply a river. It is simply flowing. The Tao Te Ching, written by the sage Laozi over 2,000 years ago, opens with a phrase that has been translated 1,000 different ways, but always carries the same river spirit. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. What he meant, in part, was this: the moment you freeze something into a fixed definition, the moment you decide you know exactly what it is, the living thing inside your definition has already moved on. Reality is always ahead of our descriptions of it. Life is always more than our maps. Laozi's favorite image for the Tao, the great way that moves through all things, was water. The highest good is like water, he wrote. Water benefits all things without striving. It flows to the lowest places that people disdain. And in this, it is close to the Tao. Water does not fight the shape of the riverbed. It does not argue with the stones. It simply moves around them, through them, under them. It finds the path of least resistance not out of weakness, but out of a kind of wisdom so deep it does not need to know it is wise. Tonight, as you breathe and settle, see if you can invite your body to be a little more like water, not holding its shape so tightly, not insisting on anything, just flowing gently into the shape of the surface that holds it. The bed beneath you, the pillow, the blanket. Let your body remember that it does not have to hold itself up. It is allowed to pour. The Sufi teachers speak of a concept called fana, a kind of dissolution, a melting away of the hard edges of the self into something larger. Not an erasure, but a reunion, like a river finding the sea. The river does not cease to exist when it reaches the ocean. It simply discovers what it was always a part of. All things change, and in the changing they return to something. The leaf falls from the branch and becomes the soil. The soil feeds the root. The root feeds the tree. The tree becomes the branch. The branch holds the new leaf. Nothing is lost. Nothing is wasted. It is all the same river wearing different shapes. All things that arise have the nature to pass away. The Stoics knew this. The Sufi masters knew this. The Zen teachers knew this. The Tao has always known this. And in the knowing, in the deep, bodily, bone-level knowing, there is not sorrow. There is rest. Let the breath come and go. Let the thoughts come and go. They are all part of the river. And you are the river. Section 2. The present moment. This breath is all you own. There is a story that has been passed quietly from teacher to student in many forms across the centuries. A student came to a Zen master, frantic, his robes disheveled, his eyes wide with a kind of philosophical panic. He said, "Master, I have been thinking about the past, and it is gone. I have been thinking about the future, and it has not arrived. I have been searching for the present moment, and I cannot find it. It is too thin. It disappears as soon as I reach for it. Where is the present moment?" The master looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Drink your tea." The student looked at his cup. He picked it up. He drank. And in the drinking, in the heat of it on his lips, in the particular earthen taste of it, in the warmth it left in his chest, something he had been searching for arrived without fanfare, without drama, as naturally as breathing. There, said the master, that the present moment is not a philosophical concept to be located. It is where you already are. It is where you have always been. It is, in a very precise and literal sense, the only place you can possibly be. The past exists now only as memory, a thought arising in this present moment. The future exists now only as imagination, another thought arising in this present moment. The present moment is not a sliver of time. It is the entire field of existence. Everything that has ever happened to you happened in a moment exactly like this one. Marcus Aurelius, that indefatigable writer of reminders to himself, put this with characteristic directness: confine yourself to the present. He did not mean ignore the lessons of the past or fail to plan for the future. He was a general. He planned constantly. But he had noticed something through years of observation, that the mind's greatest source of unnecessary suffering is its habit of living elsewhere. In yesterday's regret, in tomorrow's worry, in a meeting that already ended, in a conversation that has not yet happened. The Islamic tradition speaks of a quality called hudur, presence, being fully here. The Sufi teachers considered hudur not merely a technique of meditation, but a fundamental orientation of the soul toward reality. To be absent from the present moment, they taught, is to be absent from God, because the divine presence is only ever accessible now. Not in memory, not in anticipation. Now, the great Persian poet Hafiz, one of the luminaries of Sufi literature, wrote in his diwan with a wine-cup directness that startled his readers: the tavern of the present moment is where the real intoxication is. Not in the remembered pleasure of yesterday's cup. Not in the anticipated pleasure of tomorrow's. Now, this cup, this taste, this breath. Epictetus, the former slave who became one of the Stoics' most powerful teachers, said something that has the same pointed simplicity. He divided all of human experience into two categories: what is up to us and what is not up to us. And he pointed out, with a gentleness that belies the radicalism of the observation, that the past is not up to us. The future is not up to us. The only thing that is ever truly up to us is our response to this moment. The only real freedom is here. Let us explore a scene together. Imagine a woman sitting on a rooftop in a city somewhere warm. An old city with narrow streets, and the sound of a call to prayer drifting over the rooftops just as the sun is beginning to go down. She has been worried all day about something. Something real, something that genuinely requires her attention. But just for a moment, she rests the worry. She lets her eyes go to the horizon where the sky is doing its evening work, painting itself in colors that no artist has ever quite captured because they are gone before the brush can be lifted. She notices the warmth of the stones beneath her, still holding the day's heat. She notices the smell of something cooking from a window below. She notices that her own breath has slowed without her asking it to. And she realizes, sitting there, that the worry is still in her. She has not dissolved it, she has not solved the problem, but she is also here on this rooftop in this evening, in this particular light that will never come again in exactly this way. She is in two places at once, the worry and the beauty, and slowly, gently, as the stars begin to appear, the beauty becomes a little larger and the worry becomes a little smaller. Not because she did anything, simply because she was here for long enough that the present moment could do what the present moment always does. When we let it, it holds us. The Tao Te Ching speaks of Wei Wu Wei, action through non-action, the art of doing by not forcing. And this is precisely what the present moment asks of us. Not that we effort our way into it, not that we concentrate so hard that our temples ache, simply that we stop running away from it, simply that we stop, as the Zen master said to the student, and drink the tea. There is a teaching from the early Islamic tradition, attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The strong person is not the one who throws people down, but the one who controls himself when he is angry. The scholars of Sufism extended this insight inward. The greatest struggle, the jihad al-nafs, the struggle of the soul, is not fought on battlefields. It is fought in this breath, in this moment, in the choice to be here rather than to flee into the past or future. This is the same insight that Epictetus was teaching when he spoke of what is up to us. The Stoics called it pararesis, the capacity of the rational will to orient itself toward virtue, toward presence, toward what is real, not what we wish were real, not what we fear might become real. What is real? Now, think of a flame inside a lantern. The lantern is made of glass and sits on a windowsill. The wind blows outside. The glass shivers slightly, but the flame inside does not go out. It bends, perhaps. It flickers, but it holds. It is protected not by distance from the wind, but by the structure around it. And that structure is presence. That structure is the simple, radical act of being where you are. There is something almost mathematical about this. The past has a fixed, unchangeable truth. Whatever happened, happened. We have no power over it. The future has an infinite number of branching possibilities. We can influence it through our actions, but we cannot know it. The present moment is the only point at which our influence is direct, immediate, and total. The present moment is where all power lives. It is the fulcrum of existence. And yet, and this is the exquisite irony that the teachers of every tradition have noted, it is the place we most rarely inhabit. A Zen koan, one of those strange riddle-like questions that Zen teachers used to short-circuit the thinking mind and drop students into direct experience, goes like this: what was your face before your parents were born? It is not meant to be answered logically. It is meant to produce a particular kind of bewilderment that clears the mind of its usual furniture. What it points toward is something like this: beneath the face you show the world, beneath the story of who you are, beneath the accumulated years of experience and opinion and habit, there is something, presence, an awareness, a something that is present right now in this room reading these words, something that was present when you were 5 years old and will be present, in whatever form it takes, long after you have forgotten the content of this evening. That something is what the present moment is made of. Not time exactly, more like the awareness within which time moves. The Prophet Isa, Jesus, peace be upon him, in the Islamic tradition is sometimes referenced as a figure of profound presence and simplicity, walking from place to place with no fixed home, no accumulated possessions, only the breath and the road and the encounter. The Sufi teacher Ibn Arabi saw in this wandering a teaching. The saint is not attached to any one place because every place is equally the place of presence. Everywhere is now. Every moment is home. So here, tonight, in whatever body you are resting in, on whatever surface holds you up, this is home. Not because you have arrived somewhere special, but because you have stopped leaving. This breath, this warmth, this sound of the night outside your window, this moment that has never existed before and will never exist again. This is the only riches any of us has ever truly possessed. Drink the tea. Section 3. Being carried. The invisible hands that hold us. There is an old poem from the Ojibwe people of North America that has been passed in various forms across many generations. It goes something like this: sometimes I go about pitying myself, and all the while I am being carried by great winds across the sky. Let those words rest in you for a moment. not as poetry, as a description of your life. Right now, tonight, your heart is beating. You did not ask it to. You did not set a reminder. You did not take a course in cardiac rhythm management. It simply beats, as it has done every moment since before you were born, with a faithfulness that would humble the most devoted human being. 60, 70, perhaps 80 times per minute, billions of times across a lifetime, without a single day off, without complaint, without needing your approval or your attention. Your lungs are expanding and contracting. Your blood is moving. Somewhere in the quiet dark of your body, cells are doing their extraordinary invisible work, repairing, maintaining, communicating, creating. You are a civilization happening without a government, an ecosystem operating without a manager, an orchestra playing without anyone waving a baton. This is what the great wisdom traditions call grace, not in the narrow religious sense, but in the original sense, an unearned gift, a carrying that we did not arrange and cannot take credit for. The Taoist tradition speaks of this in terms of Tsujan, spontaneous naturalness, the way things happen of themselves when they are not forced. Laozi observed that the 10,000 things, his poetic term for the entire universe of phenomena, arise and pass away of their own accord without any central administrator. The flower blooms not because a committee approved it. The rain falls not because a ministry issued a permit. The stars rotate not because anyone is turning the wheel. The Tao, the great way, the underlying reality beneath all things, simply moves, and everything moves within it. Governing a great state is like cooking a small fish, Laozi wrote, which means, do not overwork it. Do not overcomplicate it. Trust the process. The fish knows how to be fish. The river knows how to be a river. And you, even you, lying here in the tired body that has carried you all day, you know how to be alive. You have been doing it without a manual since the first breath. Marcus Aurelius had a word for the rational order he perceived running through all of nature. The Stoics called it logos, not just logic or reason, but something closer to the intelligence woven into the fabric of the universe. He wrote, in his characteristic way of reminding himself of things he kept forgetting, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But he also wrote, more tenderly, in moments when the emperor's mask slipped and the philosopher showed through, "What injures the hive injures the bee. We are not separate creatures managing our own separate lives. We are expressions of something larger. We are bees in a hive that spans the entire universe." This is not an abstract comfort. It is a felt one. Let us explore a scene. There is an old fisherman who has spent his entire life on a particular stretch of coast. He knows those waters the way you know the back of your own hand. The currents, the seasonal shifts, the behavior of the fish in different winds. He has never thought of himself as a philosopher. He would laugh if you called him one. But one evening, sitting on the prow of his small boat as it rocks gently at anchor in a quiet bay, the sun going down behind the hills and the water turning all those colors that water turns at evening, he says something to his grandson that the grandson remembers for the rest of his life. "I've been scared out here," the fisherman says. "Real scared, more than once. Storms that came faster than anything I'd seen. Fog so thick you couldn't see the bow of your own boat. And every single time, I noticed that no matter how scared I was, the boat was still floating. The water was still holding us up. I hadn't made the water do that. I hadn't earned it. It just did. And that always helped me. Just noticing that we were still being held. We were still being held." The Islamic concept of tawakkul, trust in God, trust in the divine order, is sometimes misunderstood as a kind of passivity, a throwing up of hands. Whatever God wills, so be it. But the teachers of the tradition have always been careful to distinguish between lazy resignation and active trust. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is reported to have said, "Tie your camel, then put your trust in God. Do what is in your power to do. Make the reasonable preparations. Exercise the agency you have been given. And then release the rest. Trust the water to hold the boat." Epictetus, who had spent his early life as a slave, a man whose entire external world was controlled by others, discovered in this extremity something remarkable. He found that there was an inner room that no slave master could enter, a place inside the self that remained free regardless of what happened to the body. And from that inner room he taught everything looks different. The chains are real. The situation is genuinely difficult. But something is also being carried. Something is also being held. He would say to his students, "Do not seek to have things happen as you wish them to happen, but wish for things to happen as they do happen, and your life will go smoothly." This is not passivity. This is the deep, earned peace of someone who has stopped fighting the tide and has started to understand that the tide is not the enemy. The tide is the same force that holds the moon in its orbit and pulls the sap up through the trees in spring. It is worth trusting. There is a beautiful teaching from Ibn Atiyillah al-Iskandari, the 13th century Sufi master, that reads like a lantern placed at exactly the right point on a dark road. He wrote, "Let it not be that the existence of his gift makes you distant from him, and let it not be that the withdrawal of his gift makes you turn in despair. Everything he gives you was only lent. Everything he takes back was only borrowed. Everything lent, everything borrowed. We do not own our breath. We do not own our heartbeat. We do not own the next sunrise. We have been given these things, astonishing things, each and every one of them, and the right response is not to clench and guard and fear their ending, but to receive them with open hands, to enjoy the warmth of the borrowed coat while we have it, knowing that when it is returned, we will have been, for however long, genuinely warm. And underneath even the coat, underneath even the breath and the heartbeat, there is something that is not borrowed at all. The Stoics called it daimon, the inner divine. The Sufis called it ruh, the spirit breathed into the human being by God. The Zen teachers, in their characteristically indirect way, call it Buddha nature, the inherent clarity and luminosity of awareness itself, which no amount of confusion or fear can ultimately destroy. You have never, not for a single moment of your life, not been held. The great winds have always been carrying you. The water has always been holding the boat. The roots of the universe have been wrapped around yours since before you took your first breath in this world. And tonight, in this bed, in this body, in this quiet, you are held. Still, always, let your weight go, all of it. Let the surface beneath you take it. It has been waiting for you to give it to them. You are not falling. You are being carried. Section 4. The wheel turns. Seasons, generations, and time's great arc. There is a man in a garden somewhere in a valley that still smells of morning even though it is already afternoon. He is old, his hair is the color of cloud. His hands are mapped with decades of work. The kind of work that does not leave calluses because calluses are for the hands that fight the earth. This man's hands are simply part of the earth now. They know its moods. He is planting an olive tree. His grandson, perhaps 8 years old, is watching him from the wall where he sits swinging his legs. He is eating something, bread or a fig or something sweet, and he is watching his grandfather with the complete, unanalyzed attention that only children and the very wise seem to have access to. "Grandfather," he says, "why are you planting an olive tree? You always say it takes 100 years for an olive tree to give properly." The old man does not stop working. He presses the young roots gently into the dark earth, the way you might press a sleeping child deeper into a pillow. Then he sits back on his heels and looks at the boy. "My grandfather planted olive trees," he says. "I have been eating their olives all my life. I am planting these trees for you, and for your children, and for people neither of us will ever meet." The boy is quiet for a moment, turning this over. Then he says, "So you're not planting for yourself?" The old man smiles. "Everything I plant is for myself," he says, "because I am part of all of it. The tree, the fruit, you, the people who aren't born yet. It's all the same thing growing." This understanding that we are not separate units living separate lives that begin at birth and end at death, but expressions of a single continuous process that has been unfolding since the beginning of time and will continue long after any individual expression completes its arc, is perhaps the most freeing thing any of the wisdom traditions offer. The Buddhist concept of pratitya samutpada, which translates loosely as dependent origination or interbeing, teaches that nothing exists in isolation. Everything, every event, every person is a meeting point of an infinite number of causes and conditions. You are not simply you. You are the rain that fell on the fields that fed the people who raised you. You are the language that shaped your first thoughts. You are the love that was given to you before you could speak, and the love you have given that you will never fully see the results of. You are the whole lineage of human beings who figured out fire and language and music and kept going, kept passing something forward, kept saying without words, "Here, take this, it matters." The wheel, in the Buddhist sense, is not a symbol of entrapment. It is a symbol of continuity, of the great flowing forward of life itself, generation after generation, form after form, each one arising and passing and giving rise to the next. Marcus Aurelius was deeply preoccupied with this in the later years of his life. He would look at the great figures of history and remind himself that they, too, had passed. Alexander the Great, who wept because there were no more worlds to conquer, had become dust. Caesar had become dust. Great empires had risen and fallen like waves. And he, Marcus, Emperor of Rome, would also become dust. And this, he wrote, was not a reason for despair. It was a reason for perspective, for doing the work in front of him without grasping for permanence or fame. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. The Quran returns often to this long view of time, this vast arc of existence that extends far beyond any individual life. We belong to God, and to Him we return, says the verse read at times of loss. But the Sufi teachers heard it as more than comfort in grief. They heard it as a description of the fundamental structure of existence. We come from the source. We make our particular, beautiful, irrepeatable journey. We return. And the source is not diminished by our returning. It is, in some sense, that transcends logic, enriched. There is a scene that sometimes visits people in the middle of the night, uninvited, in that strange, unguarded space between sleeping and waking. It is the face of someone you have loved who is no longer here. Or it is your own face, caught in a mirror at an angle you did not expect, showing you something about time that you were not quite prepared for. And for a moment, the heart clenches. The sense of loss is very immediate, very personal. But the ancient teachers, from every tradition, would sit beside you in that moment and say something like this: "Yes, that is real. Feel it fully. And now look a little wider. Look at what that love was part of. Look at how many people have loved and lost and loved again. Look at the whole vast river of human loving, stretching back before history, before language. You are not the first person who has lain awake at night with love in your chest that had nowhere to go. You are part of a great, old, continuous human story. And your love, every expression of it, every moment of it, is woven into that story forever." The Taoist perspective on time is perhaps the most spacious of all. Laozi and his successor Zhuangzi spoke of time not as a river flowing in one direction but as a great cycle, like the seasons, like the breath, where what appears to be ending is always simultaneously beginning somewhere else. Winter is not the failure of summer. It is summer gathering itself for the next uprising. Death is not the failure of life. It is life taking a different form. Zhuangzi, the great Taoist storyteller, told of how when his wife died, his friend Huizi found him sitting on the ground, drumming on a bowl and singing. Huizi was scandalized. How could he sing? How could he be so unmoved? And Zhuangzi explained, with characteristic gentle strangeness. He had been sad at first, but then he remembered that before his wife was born, there was no body, no form, no spirit. And then there was, briefly, gloriously, this particular woman. And now she had returned to the great formless from which she came. To weep and howl at this, he said, would be to fail to understand the cycle. He had wept, and he had understood, and then he had sung. We are not asked to feel nothing. We are asked to feel everything, and then to widen the lens until the full picture comes into view. And the full picture always includes continuity, always includes the wheel turning, always includes something coming after what appears to be ending. Tonight, as you lie here, there are people all over the world, in cities and villages and mountains and deserts, who are also lying down in the dark. Some of them are worried. Some are peaceful. Some are sad. Some are full of a love they do not know what to do with. All of them are breathing. All of them are on the same wheel, in the same night, under the same stars that do not distinguish between empires and ordinary lives. but shine equally on both. You are not alone on the wheel. You have never been alone on the wheel. The old man planting his olive tree, he was planting it for you too. And you, in ways you may never know, are planting something for the people who come after. This is what it means to live on the vast scale. Not to deny the personal loss, the personal joy, the personal journey, but to hold it within something larger. The way the olive tree holds the olive. The way the sea holds the wave. The way the night holds every sleeper, generous and undiscriminating, resting them all in the same dark. Section 5. The still point, presence as the root of peace. In the 14th century, a woman named Julian lived in a small cell attached to a church in Norwich, England. She had, in her youth, experienced visions of such intensity that she spent the rest of her long life quietly contemplating them and writing them down with extraordinary precision and care. She never traveled far. She never addressed great crowds. People came to her window with their questions and their troubles, and she listened, and she responded, and she became, through sheer quality of presence, one of the most beloved spiritual teachers of her era. She wrote, in her own dialect, words that have crossed 7 centuries with their warmth entirely intact. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. She was not making a promise about outcomes. She was describing an orientation, a way of being in the world that rests in something deeper than the surface weather of events. This quality, this still point at the center of things, is what every wisdom tradition points toward, often with very different language, always with the same direction of pointing. The Zen tradition calls it samadhi, a collected, luminous stillness of attention that is not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of everything being completely, vibrantly present. Like a clear pool that reflects the whole sky because it is perfectly still. Not dead, still. The Stoics called it ataraxia, a tranquility of mind that comes not from the absence of difficulty but from a right relationship with difficulty. From knowing what is yours to carry and what is not. From holding your responses rather than being held by them. The Sufi tradition calls it sukuun al-qalb, the stillness of the heart. The place past the turbulence of desire and fear where the heart returns to its original nature, which is openness, which is presence, which is, in the Sufi framework, proximity to the divine. And Laozi called it simply wu, emptiness, vacancy, the hollow of a bowl that makes the bowl useful. 30 spokes share the wheel's hub, he wrote. It is the center hole that makes it useful. The thing that looks like nothing is the thing that makes everything else work. These are not different teachings. They are different lamps illuminating the same room. Let us explore a scene together. Imagine a marketplace in an old city, the kind where the streets are so narrow that the sunlight only arrives for a few hours each day, arriving as a vertical stripe of gold that moves slowly across the stones as the afternoon advances. The marketplace is loud, fragrant, chaotic, spices in open sacks, merchants calling out their prices, children running between the legs of adults, donkeys with loads too large for them, picking their way through the crowd with a kind of dignified patience. And in the middle of all of this, in a small space that is not quite a stall and not quite a doorway, sitting on a simple mat with a cup of tea, there is a very old man, a dervish, a Sufi wanderer, someone the locals know by name and by reputation. People stop to speak with him. A merchant with a troubled face sits down and talks. The dervish listens. A woman with a child who won't eat comes and describes her worry. The dervish listens. A young man full of urgent questions about God and the meaning of existence pours out his thoughts like water from an overfull jug. The dervish listens and occasionally speaks, and when he speaks, the young man goes quiet in a way he was not able to when he was speaking himself. A traveler passing through the city watches all of this from a slight distance and finally, unable to contain his curiosity, approaches and asks the dervish, "How do you remain so calm? The marketplace is chaos. Everyone around you is rushing or worried or wanting something. How are you so still in the middle of all of it?" The dervish considers this. He takes a sip of his tea. Then he says, "I am not still despite the marketplace. The marketplace is what allows me to be still. Each person who comes is my teacher. Each question is a door. I don't try to be somewhere else. I try to be here, completely here with whoever is here." And when you stop trying to be anywhere else, the stillness finds you. You don't find it. It finds you. This is the insight that every tradition confirms. Peace is not a destination. It is not a state you achieve after sufficient preparation. It is not a reward for spiritual effort. It is what is always present beneath the movement, the way the floor of the ocean is always still even when the surface is churning. Marcus Aurelius described it from the inside. He wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." This was not a man writing from an armchair. This was a man who was governing an empire while also fighting wars and mourning the deaths of children and managing a court full of politics and betrayal. He found his still point not by leaving those circumstances but by going deeper into himself within them. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who spent decades working for peace in the middle of one of the 20th century's most devastating conflicts, spoke of a concept he called interbeing. The recognition that we are not separate from the circumstances we find ourselves in, but we are deeply, intrinsically connected to everything around us. And paradoxically, this recognition of connection, which sounds like it would make things more overwhelming, is actually what creates the still point. Because when you are no longer fighting against reality, when you are no longer trying to be somewhere else or someone else, when you are simply here, being what you are, connected to what is, then the fighting stops. And when the fighting stops, what was always there reveals itself. The Islamic concept of dhikr, remembrance, the practice of repeating the names of God or certain sacred phrases, is, at its deepest level, a practice of returning. Not of going somewhere new, of returning. The heart has a home, and it has wandered from it, and dhikr is the practice of coming back. La ilaha illa Allah, there is no God but God, is understood by the Sufi teachers not as a theological proposition only, but as an existential map. A clearing of the mind of everything that is not essential. A returning to the one ground beneath all grounds. You have a still point. It is in you right now. It has been in you every moment of your life, even when you did not know it, even when you could not feel it. The way the eye of a storm is always calm, even while the storm itself is deafening. Tonight, you do not need to find it. You only need to stop moving away from it. Let the breath settle. Let the eyes rest behind their closed lids. Let the jaw soften. Let the hands open. The stillness is here. The stillness has always been here. It is not waiting for you to be good enough or calm enough or healed enough. It is simply waiting for you to stop and look and notice that it was never anywhere else. Section 6. The tailor and the fresh measurement. On habits and the freedom beneath them. A certain wisdom was expressed this way in different traditions and different mouths over the centuries. The wisest craftsman in your life may not be your teacher or your doctor or your priest. It may be your tailor, because the tailor, every time you come in, takes new measurements. He does not say, "I know your size from 3 years ago." He brings out the tape and he measures you as you are now, in this body, in this season of your life. He honors the reality of the present over the convenience of the memory. Most of us are not tailors to ourselves or to each other. We measure people once, and sometimes long ago, and we carry that measurement forward as though time had stopped at the moment of our first assessment. Our children grow and change and shed their old selves like snake skin, and we still sometimes find ourselves responding to the 14-year-old in the kitchen when a 30-year-old is standing there, fully formed, waiting to be seen. Our friends surprise us with who they have become, and instead of receiving the surprise with delight, we sometimes feel unsettled, as though the surprise were a kind of betrayal, as though they had violated a contract to remain the person we decided they were. And what we do to others, we do to ourselves with even greater severity. I am the kind of person who panics. I have always been anxious. I will never be good at this. I always fall apart under pressure. I am not someone who forgives easily. These are old measurements, worn smooth from handling, that we pull out again and lay across our current selves without stopping to ask whether they still apply. Whether the person who was measured under those conditions still exists. Whether the conditions themselves have not shifted in ways that might yield entirely different results, if only we would bring a fresh tape to the work. The Buddhist concept most relevant here is karma, but not in the popular sense of cosmic rewards and punishments. The original meaning of karma is simply action, and particularly the patterns of action that create grooves in our experience over time. A habit is karma. A repeated response is karma. The well-worn path the mind takes before any conscious decision is made, that is karma. And what the Buddha taught is not that karma is fixed, but that it can be changed. Not easily, and not instantly, but with attention and patience and the willingness to introduce new patterns into the stream. This is precisely what the Stoics meant by prohairesis, the capacity of the rational will to choose differently. Epictetus did not deny that habits are powerful. He knew better than anyone. As a slave, he had been subject to forces that most people never experience. But he discovered in that extremity something that has since been confirmed by teachers in every tradition. The will is not completely determined by circumstance. There is always, in every situation, however constrained, a hairline crack of choice. And in that crack, if you are attentive enough and patient enough, something new can grow. The Sufi tradition speaks of tawbah, usually translated as repentance, but carrying a meaning closer to turning or returning. Not the bitter self-flagellation of guilt, but the gentle turning of the whole self back toward its source. The turning of a flower toward the light. It is not about punishing yourself for having faced the wrong direction. It is simply about noticing that you are facing the wrong direction and turning. That's all. The door is not locked. The return is available at any moment. A hadith Qudsi, one of the sayings attributed to God speaking through the Prophet Muhammad, puts this with a tenderness that stops the breath. Take 1 step toward me, I will take 10 steps toward you. Walk toward me, I will run toward you. The movement toward what is true, toward what is whole, toward what is free. It is never too small to count. 1 step in the right direction, however slow, however uncertain, however partial, it counts. Something moves to meet it. Let us explore a scene that has a quiet comedy in it, because comedy is sometimes the fastest way to wisdom. There is a woman who has lived alone for some years after a long marriage ended. She has, during those years, developed a very specific ritual around Thursday evenings. She cooks a particular meal. She watches a particular kind of television program. She lights a particular candle. She does this not because she particularly loves any of these things, but because she did them the first Thursday after her marriage ended, and then the second Thursday, and then before she knew it, the ritual had set like concrete. It had become simply what Thursday evenings are. One Thursday, a friend calls unexpectedly and invites her to a concert. Something unusual, music she has never heard, played by musicians from a country she has never visited. Her first instinct is an almost physical resistance. I have my thing, she thinks, without quite using those words. I have my routine. But she goes, and the music does something to her. Not transforms her, not revolutionizes her life, but opens very gently a window that had been painted shut. She discovers that Thursday evening is not a fixed thing, that she is not required by some deep law of her being to light that particular candle in that particular way. She is allowed to be surprised. She is allowed to discover that she contains possibilities she had not recently consulted. This is the tailor and the fresh measurement, not a dramatic overhaul, a simple act of checking whether what was true then is still true now. The Tao Te Ching approaches this from a different angle. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, Laozi wrote. But he also wrote, in a related spirit, in the pursuit of learning, every day something is acquired. In the pursuit of Tao, every day something is dropped. The spiritual path, in the Taoist view, is not about accumulation. It is about simplification, about releasing the layers of habit and assumption and fixed identity until what remains is something closer to Pu, the uncarved block, the original nature that was there before any of the carving began. Zhuangzi told a story of a cook who had mastered the art of butchering an ox so completely that his knife never dulled, because he moved through the natural spaces in the animal rather than cutting against anything. He was not using force. He was using understanding. He knew the territory so well, the joints, the cavities, the places where things naturally separate, that his work had become effortless. Years of practice had given him, paradoxically, something that looked like not working. This is what the freedom beneath habits looks like. Not the dramatic breaking of all patterns, but the gradual, patient, compassionate development of a relationship with our own inner territory. Learning where the joints are, learning where things naturally want to separate, learning to move through ourselves with the cook's knife. Not forcing, not struggling, but finding the natural places where what is ready to be released will release itself. Zen meditation at its simplest is exactly this. You sit, you watch the thoughts arise. You do not follow them. You do not fight them. You simply notice. There is a thought, and then you return to the breath. And then another thought arises, and you notice again, and return again. It sounds almost absurdly simple, but over time, over many returns, many noticings, many gentle refusals to be swept away, something begins to loosen. The grooves of habitual thinking become shallower. The space between the thought and the response becomes perceptible. And in that space, the freedom lives. Between stimulus and response there is a space, wrote Viktor Frankl, who discovered this truth in the most extreme circumstances imaginable, as a prisoner in Nazi concentration camps. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. The space is always there. It may be very narrow at first in the habits we have been running for decades, but it is there, and like a seed crack in pavement, once something begins to grow in it, it slowly, imperceptibly, inevitably widens. Tonight there is no assignment, no habit to break, no pattern to overthrow, just the quiet noticing, the fresh measurement, the gentle curiosity. Who am I right now, in this moment, in this body, in this life? Not the one I decided I was 5 or 10 years ago, but now. The answer to that question cannot be found by thinking, can only be felt, in the breath, in the quiet, in the simple, radical, available reality of being here, exactly as you are. Section 7. Beginner's Mind. Seeing as if for the first time. There is something that happens in the body of a child who has never seen snow before, in the first few seconds of encountering it. You can observe it if you have the privilege of being present for such a moment. First, there is a kind of arrest. The whole body goes quiet, as though all other processing has been suspended so that every available resource can be directed toward this phenomenon. The eyes widen. The mouth opens slightly. The hands, if the child is outside, reach out, not to grab, but to feel, to verify, to make contact with the impossible fact of what they are seeing. And then, only then, after the direct experiencing, comes the beginning of language. What is it? Is it cold? Where does it come from? Why does it disappear when I hold it? The questions arrive after the experience, not before it. And the experience itself, that first wordless encounter with something truly new, has a quality to it that all the subsequent knowledge about snow, all the weather reports and poetry and scientific explanation, will never quite replicate. The great Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki, who brought Zen to the American West in the 1960s, distilled a lifetime of practice into a phrase that has since circled the globe many times. In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few. He was not criticizing expertise. He was identifying a risk. The risk that accumulation of knowledge, of certainty, of fixed opinion can slowly close the aperture through which the world enters us. That we can become so certain of what we already know that we stop being available for what we do not yet know. That the map, which began as a tool for navigating the territory, can end up substituting for the territory entirely. The Taoist concept of Piyu, the uncarved block, carries the same spirit. Before the sculptor applies the chisel, the block of wood contains infinite possibility. Any form could emerge from it. Every form is latent within it. The moment the first cut is made, the possibilities begin to narrow. And when the sculpture is finished, however beautiful it may be, it can only be what it is. The uncarved block could have been anything. The finished sculpture can only be itself. Pu is not a critique of becoming. It is a reminder to hold our becoming lightly, to remain, in some essential way, still potentially anything, even as we are specifically something. The Islamic intellectual tradition has a concept called ilm al-yaqin, the knowledge of certainty, which the Sufi teachers carefully distinguished from haq al-yaqin, the truth of certainty. The first is intellectual knowing, the kind we can accumulate and sort and store. The second is something different, a knowing that happens in the whole being, that arrives not through analysis but through presence, through surrender, through a kind of openness to reality that the accumulated intellect, for all its power, sometimes blocks rather than enables. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is reported to have made a supplication that the Sufi teachers treasured. O God, show me things as they truly are, not as I already believe them to be, not filtered through my assumptions, not organized by my prior conclusions, as they truly are. This is beginner's prayer. This is the prayer of someone who understands that their current seeing may not be complete, who is willing at the level of daily practice to be wrong, to be surprised, to be taught. Marcus Aurelius, for all his authority, returned constantly to the posture of the student. He would remind himself to listen to criticism, to consider opposing views, to approach situations without the assumption that his first judgment was the correct one. He wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change." This from an emperor, a man whose word was law. The willingness to be changed by evidence. The willingness to not know. Epictetus framed it this way: "It is impossible to learn what one thinks one already knows. The full cup cannot be filled. The hand that is already holding something cannot receive a gift. The mind that is certain cannot discover. There is a scene that feels worth dwelling in. Imagine an old calligrapher, a master of Arabic calligraphy, a tradition in which a single line of text can take a lifetime to perfect. He has been practicing his art for 50 years. His work hangs in mosques and libraries and the homes of people who recognize in it something rare. Not just technical skill, but a kind of spiritual transmission, the way the care put into the making of something becomes visible in the thing made. A young student comes to study with him. The student is talented and has already spent several years learning and is anxious, in the way that talented young people often are, to demonstrate what he knows. He shows the master his work. It is genuinely good, genuinely promising. And the master looks at it for a long time. Then the master says, "Show me how you hold the pen before you put it to the paper." The student is puzzled. He shows him, "And show me what you are thinking in the moment before the brush touches the surface." The student thinks about this. He realizes, somewhat uncomfortably, that what he is thinking is, "I hope this is good. I hope he is impressed. I hope this justifies the years of practice." The master nods, as though he has seen something he expected. When the brush touches the paper, he says, "There should be nobody in the room but the paper and the letter. Not you, not me, not the hope of being impressive. The letter wants to be written. Your job is to get out of the way." The student works with this for several weeks. And one morning, he finds the pen moving in his hand with a kind of confidence he has never felt before. Not the confidence of someone who knows they are good, but the confidence of someone who has, for a moment, stopped worrying about whether they are good. He is simply writing, simply here. He realizes, looking at what he has made, that he cannot quite remember making it. He was not absent. He was, in fact, more present than he had ever been. But the self that usually watches and evaluates and worries had stepped aside. And in that stepping aside, the letter had written itself through him. This is beginner's mind as embodied practice. Not the beginner's uncertainty of the student who knows nothing. The beginner's openness of the master who has practiced long enough to set down the need to prove themselves and simply be present with the work. The Zen tradition has a practice of answering from don't know. The Korean teacher Sungsun made this famous in his teaching. Don't know mind, not as ignorance, as radical openness. The mind that does not already have the answer, and is therefore actually available to receive one. Don't know what this moment will bring. Don't know how this situation will unfold. Don't know who this person really is beneath the story I have been telling about them. Don't know what I am capable of if I stop assuming I already know. Don't know is terrifying to the ego, which has built its entire sense of safety on the architecture of certainty. But to the deeper self, to whatever in us is actually alive, actually present, actually here, don't know feels like air, like space, like the uncarved block, full of every possible form. Tonight, the invitation is simple. Notice as you rest here, whether there are any places where you are holding certainty that you could, just for now, set down. Not forever, just for tonight, just for this breath. I don't know exactly what tomorrow holds. I don't know exactly who I will be when I wake up. I don't know what is possible for me. And instead of these statements being frightening, let them be, at least for a moment, spacious. Let them be the snow falling through the darkening air, each flake its own particular shape, each one melting on the palm before you can quite decide what it was. This is the world the wisdom traditions are inviting you into. Not a world of certainty and control and fixed identity. A world that is living and changing and full of surprises. A world that you cannot fully grasp and do not need to, because it is already grasping you, holding you, carrying you, showing you something new in every breath. Let the knowing rest. Let the not knowing open. Section 8. The 8 Winds. Being human without apology. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a teaching that no amount of practice makes irrelevant, because it describes not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be understood. It is the teaching of the Ashta, Lokadharma, the 8 worldly winds. They blow through every human life without exception. They blow through the monastery and the marketplace, through the philosopher's study and the farmer's field. They are pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and obscurity. These 4 pairs of opposites are the weather of human existence, and every one of us, without exception, is exposed to all of them. The question is not how to make the wind stop. The question, the ancient, patient question, is how to stand in the wind without losing your footing. Marcus Aurelius understood this from inside one of the most exposed positions imaginable. The center of the Roman Empire, where every decision was scrutinized, every failure magnified, every success attributed to others or to luck, and where the praise of thousands could reverse to blame overnight. He wrote, "The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are. Not to pretend the winds don't blow, but to know what the winds are, weather passing weather, so that they move through you rather than sweeping you away." The Stoic term apatheia is often mistranslated as apathy. It means something far more alive. Not the absence of feeling, but the absence of being controlled by feeling. The Stoic sage does not become a stone. He becomes, as Epictetus described, someone who has learned to distinguish between the wave and the ocean. The wave moves, the ocean holds. The wave is real, but it is not the whole story. The Islamic tradition approaches the 8 winds through the concept of sabr, patience or endurance, but in a much richer sense than those words usually carry in English. Sabr is not passive waiting. It is the active, courageous holding of one's center while the winds blow. The Quran says, "Surely, God is with those who are patient." And the Sufi teachers heard this as not merely a promise of divine companionship in difficulty, but a description of where the deepest reality becomes visible. In the middle of difficulty, patiently endured, something that was not accessible before becomes accessible. The wind carves the canyon. The difficulty reveals the depth. Rumi, who understood personal loss with a depth that gives his poetry its unbearable tenderness. He lost his greatest teacher, his beloved friend Shams of Tabriz, in circumstances that left him shattered, wrote in a way that turns the wound into something luminous. The wound is the place where the light enters you. This is not a teaching for those who have not yet been hurt. It is a teaching for those who have been hurt and are trying to understand what the hurt is for. It is for the 8 winds. The winds are not mistakes in the design. They are the design. They are what carves the interior landscape into something with depth, with texture, with shadow and light. The person who has never been blown by the wind of loss does not know what it is to hold something precious. The person who has never felt the sting of blame does not know what it is to be truly seen by praise. The 8 winds create the inner life that makes us capable of real depth, real connection, real presence. Let us explore a scene with some warmth in it. There is a writer who has been working on the same piece for a very long time. Longer than she intended, longer than she told anyone she was working on it, and longer, certainly, than she told herself. It is the kind of writing that matters to her in a way she finds hard to articulate. It is the writing that contains the truest things she knows, and for that reason it is also the most frightening to show. When she finally finishes it and puts it into the world, she discovers the 8 winds in operation with remarkable clarity. Some people find it deeply moving. Letters arrive from strangers, not many, but some, and each one is a small miracle, the discovery that something true you said has reached something true in someone you never met. She reads these letters many times. She feels the wind of praise, the wind of gain, the warmth of recognition. And it is wonderful. She is a human being with a heart that feels things, and she receives this warmth with gratitude. And then the wind shifts. A review appears that is not kind. It is not cruel precisely. It is simply indifferent in a way that somehow stings more than cruelty would. It finds her work too personal, too quiet, insufficiently ambitious. She reads it once and then again because we always read these things again, hoping that on the second reading it will have changed, that we will have misunderstood. But it says what it says. And for a day or two, she feels it, the contraction, the sudden desire to take the whole thing back, the wondering whether the stranger's letters were real or polite. The wind of blame doing exactly what winds do, blowing. But then, on the third day, sitting in her kitchen with her coffee going cold because she has been watching the light move across the floor in a way that she finds, despite everything, beautiful, she notices something. The review is still true. The letters are also still true. Both things are true simultaneously. The wind of blame and the wind of praise have blown through the same piece of work, and both are simply weather. Her work is what it is. The winds are what they are. And she is still here, and she still meant what she wrote, and the particular quality of early morning light across the kitchen floor is still enough to arrest her. She picks up the coffee. She drinks it. This returning to what is actually here, this refusing to let the winds carry you all the way to the horizon and back while you stand in the middle looking confused about which way is home. This is equanimity. Not a flat, affectless numbness. Not the pretense that praise and blame taste the same. They don't. Praise is warm and blame is cold, and everyone who tells you they feel no difference is performing. But equanimity is the capacity to feel the difference, fully, honestly, without minimizing, and still know where home is, to feel the wind, and remember that you are the sky. The Tao Te Ching offers this. Care about people's approval, and you will be their prisoner. Not a command to stop caring. An observation about what happens when caring crosses into dependency. The Taoist sage receives approval with gratitude and releases it without grasping. Receives blame with curiosity and releases it without drowning. Because the sage knows, not as a concept but as a lived orientation, that neither the praise nor the blame is the whole truth. The whole truth is vaster than any wind. Epictetus put it with his characteristic sharpness. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. The wind itself is neutral. It is our evaluation of the wind, the story we tell about what it means that the wind is blowing this way right now, that creates suffering or peace. And the practice, the ancient, simple, infinitely repeatable practice, is to notice the story, to see the wind for wind, to feel the weather and remember that you are the sky. Tonight, as you rest here, you might let yourself feel whatever is here. Whatever worry or pride or tenderness or loneliness or relief the day has left in its wake. Let it be exactly what it is without requiring it to be something else. Feel the particular temperature of it. Notice where it lives in the body. And then, as gently as you can, widen. Wider than the feeling. Wider than the thought. As wide as the sky above whatever city you are sleeping in tonight. As wide as the night itself, which holds all weather with the same patient dark, the same unhurried stars, the same offer of rest to anyone who is willing to accept it. The winds will blow tomorrow. They will bring whatever they bring. And you will be there, rooted in something the winds cannot reach, meeting them with whatever wisdom and humor and grace you can manage. Not perfectly, not without feeling them, but with your feet on the ground and your weight resting and something in you steady enough to stand. Section 9. Forgiveness. The heart that opens like a window. There is a particular quality of light that comes into a room when a window that has been closed for a long time is finally opened. It is not brighter than ordinary light, but it is different. There is something in it. A freshness, a movement, a sense of the outside world entering where the inside world had been sealed, that makes the room feel, for a moment, as though it has taken a breath. Forgiveness is this. not a moral achievement, not a performance of generosity. A window opened, a breath taken, the outside world, the world of movement and change and release, allowed back into a room that had been sealed against it. We seal the room for good reasons. When something hurts us, when trust is broken, when a careless word lands somewhere tender, when an action leaves a wound that takes longer to heal than we expected, the heart closes. This is not a failure. This is intelligence. The sea creature pulling into its shell. The body protecting what needs protecting. But the shell was never meant to be permanent. The Sufi tradition has a word for forgiveness, AFW, and in the Quran it is listed as one of the attributes of the divine. Al-Afu, the pardoner, the one who erases. The scholars of the tradition noted that the Arabic root of AFW carries a meaning of wiping clean, not just setting aside, but genuinely clearing, as rain clears dust from a surface and reveals what was always underneath. Not forgetting, revealing, showing what was there before the wounding. The Stoics approached forgiveness through their concept of oikiosis, the natural affinity or kinship that all rational beings share with one another. Marcus Aurelius wrote, again and again, in his private journals, variations of the same reminder. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly, but I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. He was not excusing bad behavior. He was locating the wrongdoer within the human family, saying this too is part of what it means to be human, and I am part of that same human family. This is the beginning of forgiveness, not the warm feeling of it that may come later or may not come at all, but the recognition that the person who hurt you is also a person, also lost, also trying, also carrying things you cannot see, also beneath whatever wound they may have inflicted. A creature who breathes and fears and hopes and will one day also need to be forgiven. The Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, with the gentle devastation that characterizes his best work, about what he called understanding as the other face of love. If you don't understand someone's suffering, you cannot love them. And in that sentence lives the seed of forgiveness. Not the approval of what was done, not the pretense that it was acceptable, but the willingness to try to understand, even partially, even imperfectly, what it is like to be the person who did it. Let us explore a scene. There is a woman who carries, in the otherwise spacious and warm architecture of her inner life, a single small locked room. She has been carrying it for many years. In the room is a version of a conversation she once had with her mother. Not a dramatic confrontation, not the kind of scene that makes it into novels, just an ordinary conversation that went wrong in an ordinary way. Her mother said something that landed badly, that touched a place in the daughter that was already bruised, and the daughter responded in kind, and the conversation ended in a silence that was never quite fully repaired before her mother died. She does not think about this room every day. She does not suffer over it constantly, but it is there. She knows it is there because sometimes, in the middle of completely unrelated moments, a beautiful afternoon, a funny dinner with friends, she feels, without quite knowing why, a small shadow passing through her, a sense of something unresolved, something that needs her attention and is not quite getting it. One afternoon, she is sorting through her mother's things. She has been putting this off for 2 years, and she finds a letter her mother had begun writing but never finished. It is addressed to no one in particular, or perhaps to everyone, the kind of letter people write when they are trying to understand something about themselves. And in it, her mother is trying to explain, not to her daughter, not to anyone, just to the page, why she sometimes found it so hard to say the right thing, why the words she meant to offer in warmth so often came out as something else. The daughter reads it standing in her mother's kitchen with the winter light coming through the window, and something in the architecture of her inner life shifts. Not collapses, shifts. The small locked room is still there, but the key, she notices, has been in her pocket the whole time. The Taoist image for forgiveness is water. Laozi writes, "The highest good is like water. Water benefits all things without striving and settles in the lowly places. Water does not insist on being above things. It finds the lowest place and fills it without complaint. And in the course of centuries, water does what force cannot. It wears away stone. Not by fighting it, by being consistently, patiently, humbly present. This is what forgiveness looks like from the inside, not a dramatic single act. A long, patient presence with what happened. A willingness to keep coming back to the locked room, not to force it open, but simply to stand outside it with a kind of quiet company. And one day, the way spring comes, not announced, not scheduled, simply arriving because the conditions are right. The door opens. Epictetus. It is not he who gives abuse that affronts, but the view that we take of it as insulting. He was not denying the reality of harm. He was pointing at where the long-term suffering lies, not in the original wound, but in the story we wrap around it. The wound happened. The story about the wound, the elaborations, the justifications, the carefully maintained case for why we were right. That is what forgiveness releases. Not the memory, the maintenance of the case. And perhaps the most important thing about forgiveness, the thing that every tradition seems to agree on though they say it in different ways. The primary beneficiary is not the person being forgiven. It is the one doing the forgiving, the Quran. And let them pardon and overlook. Would you not like that God should forgive you? The Sufi teachers heard in this verse not a transaction. Forgive so that you will be forgiven, but a revelation of structure. Forgiveness flows. It is not a finite resource that we spend when we offer it. It is a current that moves through us when we allow it. When we allow it, we are also bathed in it. Forgiveness of others. And, perhaps even more difficult, perhaps even more necessary, forgiveness of ourselves. We carry our own failures in a locked room too. The things we said and wish we hadn't. The things we didn't say and wish we had. The person we were in a particular season of our life, when fear or immaturity or simple wrong-headedness led us to act in ways that we now wince to remember. We can be very harsh with that person. We can visit the locked room regularly not to understand but to punish. But the ancient teachers, every single one of them, without exception, counseled otherwise. The Quran. God does not burden a soul beyond that it can bear. Epictetus. Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life. Included in what happens, the imperfect self you have been, the mistakes you have made, the less than you hoped version of yourself that you have been in certain seasons. You did not always know what you know now. You did what you could with what you had. And the person you are now, the one lying here in the dark, breathing, hoping, still willing to take the question of being alive seriously enough to spend a quiet evening with ancient wisdom, that person has grown. That person is not the same as the one in the locked room. Fresh measurements. The door of the locked room does not need to be kicked open. It can be opened slowly, with curiosity rather than judgment. It can be walked through with the kind of care you would show a room that has been closed for a long time and needs to air. With patience. With the long, patient willingness of water wearing stone. The window opened. The light coming in. All shall be well. Section 10. The vast forest. Coming out the other side. There is a proverb, passed along through many languages and many mouths, that goes like this. You can only walk halfway into the darkest forest. After that, you are coming out the other side. Let that arrive slowly. You can only walk halfway into the darkest forest. The nature of difficulty, of real difficulty, the kind that feels bottomless, the kind that makes you wonder in the 3 a.m. hours whether there is any ground beneath this falling. The nature of it includes this law. It has a middle. It must have a middle because it has a beginning and therefore it has an end, and between the beginning and the end there is a point that is equidistant from both. A midpoint, a place past which every step is a step in the other direction. You may not be able to see it. The forest may still feel total, trees in every direction, the sky barely visible above, the path difficult to follow. But the physics are the same regardless of what the forest looks like. If you have come this far, you have been walking forward. And forward, in every forest, eventually becomes out. This is not a teaching about optimism. The wise traditions are not in the business of cheerful denial. Marcus Aurelius did not sit in his campaigns and tell his soldiers to think positively. The Sufi teachers did not console the bereaved by telling them everything happens for the best. The Zen masters did not look at a student in genuine crisis and offer them a motivational slogan. What they offered was something different, something more precise and more useful, a description of the actual structure of difficulty. Difficulty is not permanent. Not because everything works out, it does not always work out in the way we hoped, but because everything changes. Even the worst difficulty is not static. It shifts, it evolves, it moves through its own seasons the way all things move through seasons. And in the moving, there is always the possibility that the next step is already on the other side of the midpoint, even if you cannot feel it yet. The Buddhist concept of dukkha, usually translated as suffering, but more precisely meaning a subtle unsatisfactoriness, a quality of things not quite fitting, like a wheel that is slightly off-center, is not a pessimistic teaching. It is a precise one. It does not say life is suffering. It says life contains a built-in friction, a gap between things as they are and things as we wish they were, and this gap is a source of recurring discomfort. But dukkha is not the final word. The final word, in the Buddhist understanding, is nirvana, not a place you go after death, but a quality of mind accessible in this life, in this body, in this breath, when the grasping and the fighting and the insistence that things be different than they are is finally, even briefly, released. The road out of the forest. The Islamic tradition has, woven through the Quran, a phrase that appears in its most concentrated form in Surah Ash-Shar. For indeed, with hardship will be ease. Indeed, with hardship will be ease. The scholars note that in Arabic grammar, the repetition and the specific use of the definite and indefinite articles create a particular meaning. One hardship, two eases. Hardship arrives alone. Ease arrives in pairs, accompanying the hardship itself and following it. This is not naive comfort. It is a structural observation about the nature of experience. That within difficulty, if we look carefully enough, there are seeds of what comes after. The hardship that teaches. The loss that reveals what was essential. The long dark winter that prepares the soil for an extraordinary spring. The old grandfather on the plain, who held his body slightly off the seat the whole flight because he could not quite trust the air to hold him. He saw, from that height, the whole valley he had spent his life in. The very difficulty of being off the ground was also the thing that showed him what he had never been able to see from within it. The smallness of the farmhouse, the silver thread of the creek, the stone wall stretching along the hillside, written in rock. Sometimes the forest lifts us above itself, and for a moment we see the whole thing. Our whole life, all its paths and its clearings, the parts that looked like dead ends that turned out to lead somewhere, and the view is worth every difficult step of the journey. The Tao Te Ching says, "To the mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders. Not the mind that has solved all its problems. Not the mind that has no more difficulties. The still mind. The mind that is willing, in the middle of the forest, to stop walking and simply listen. To what the forest actually sounds like. To what the birds are actually doing in the branches above. To what the quality of the light through the leaves is actually showing. Because sometimes the forest is dark, and sometimes the forest is astonishingly, specifically, unrepeatable beautiful, and sometimes it is both simultaneously at once. There is a concept in the Sufi tradition called baraka, a kind of blessing or grace that flows through sacred things and sacred moments, but also, the teachers insist, through ordinary moments fully attended to. A meal cooked with love carries baraka. A conversation in which one person truly listens to another carries baraka. A night in which someone lies in the dark and, instead of fighting the darkness, receives it. This also carries baraka. The night is not empty. The darkness is not absence. The forest, even at its deepest, even at its most disorienting, is full of life, full of sound, full of the particular intelligence of living things doing what they are made to do, regardless of whether any human being is watching. And you are a living thing in the forest. You are doing what you are made to do. You are breathing and resting and moving through your particular arc of time. You have passed through things that seemed impossible to pass through. You are still here, which means you have been, at every point in the journey so far, already on the way out of whatever forest you were walking into. Marcus Aurelius, near what he knew were the final years of his life, wrote something that has the quality of a man standing at the edge of the forest looking back. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. He had governed the most powerful empire in the world. He had seen praise and blame, gain and loss, life and death, in quantities that would overwhelm most people. And what he had arrived at was not cynicism. It was something closer to a vast, quiet humility, an understanding that no single vantage point shows the whole picture, that every certainty, every judgment, every story about what is happening, it is a perspective. It is one angle on a reality that is larger than any angle can contain. The forest is real. The difficulty is real. The feeling of being lost is real. And also, you are already, without knowing it, past the halfway point. You are already, without being able to feel it yet, on the way out. The ancient chant that the Buddhist monks and nuns have whispered for over 2,000 years, at births and at passings, in great temples and in small rooms, says this: all things that arise have the nature to pass away, not eventually, grudgingly, after a very long time. It is their nature. Passage is what they do. It is what they are. The difficulty is not a permanent resident. It is a guest. Guests come. Guests stay. Guests leave. The house remains. And you are the house. We have been traveling tonight through many rooms of the same great house. The house that the human wisdom traditions have been building for as long as human beings have been wise enough to need shelter from their own storms. We have sat beside rivers and watched the light change. We have chased sunrises across the sky. We have let our weight down at last into the seat that was always there. We have planted trees that we may never see bear fruit. We have sat in the marketplace beside the dervish who found his stillness not away from the crowd but inside it. We have brought the fresh tape measure to our own habits and found them more flexible than we feared. We have sat in the snow and opened our mouths to taste something we didn't have a name for yet. We have stood in the 8 winds and discovered that we are the sky. We have found, in the locked room, that the key was always in our pocket. We have walked into the forest and discovered that we were already, without knowing it, on the way out. Not always so. Those 3 words, the Zen master's entire summary of all the wisdom he had spent a lifetime gathering, contain everything. The pain, not always so. The confusion, not always so. The sense of being alone in the forest, not always so. The joy, the clarity, the connection, the ease, not always so either. But not forever, not fixed, never without the possibility of change. And in the not always so, in the spacious, breathing possibility that things are moving even when they appear to be still, that the darkest point of the forest is also the turning point, that the river is always flowing even when the surface looks like glass. There is a peace that the wisdom traditions call by many names. Satori, tranquillitas, sukuin, wu-wei, the peace that passes understanding. It is not the peace of having no more problems. It is the peace of knowing that the river is alive, that the wheel is turning, that the forest has an other side, that you are held, always held, by something you cannot name and do not need to name, only trust. The breath comes in, new, unrepeatable, here. The breath goes out, released, complete, gone. And in the space between, in that small, still moment at the end of the exhale before the next breath arrives, there is a silence, just a heartbeat of silence. And in it, if you are quiet enough to hear, something that has always been true makes itself known. All is well. All is well. All manner of things shall be well. Closing. The night holds everything. Very slowly, very softly, we are arriving now at the quiet edge of this journey. Not its end. These old teachings have no end. They simply circle back through us in new seasons, offering new meanings, meeting us where we are rather than where we were when we first heard them. Thank you for walking here. Thank you for the quiet, generous act of giving your attention to these rivers. Zen and Stoic and Taoist and Sufi and the old indigenous truth that the sky is carrying us, always carrying us, even when we have forgotten to look up. You do not need to carry any of this away with you tonight. The seeds are planted. Like the old man's olive tree, they will grow in their own time, in their own way, tended by whatever in you is already turning toward the light. Outside, wherever you are, the night is doing what the night does, holding everything with the same quiet generosity it has offered every sleeper since the first night fell on the first human who looked up at the stars and felt, for a moment, less alone. The stars are there, whether you can see them or not. The moon is in its phase. The earth is turning, slowly, reliably, carrying you through the dark toward a morning it has been faithfully delivering for 4 billion years without fail. You are held by all of it. You have always been held by all of it. Let the breath come, slow and soft and new. Let the breath go, released and complete and done. And in the space between, the great silence that holds all sound, the great stillness that holds all movement, the great river that carries all things, rest. All things that arise have the nature to pass away. To understand this fully and live within it is to touch the hem of peace. May you be at ease. May your heart be soft. May the great winds carry you gently through the night. Sleep well,